Bedtime favorites. Pinocchio, a nose for trouble. School was out for the day, and Pinocchio was ready to have some fun. The puppet skipped down the cobblestone street. A small figure followed him, clutching an umbrella. It was Pinocchio's pal, Jiminy Cricket. "Wait for me," he called. Jiminy caught up with Pinocchio in front of the small shop where the puppet lived with Geppetto, his father. Geppetto carved all sorts of things out of wood, but his greatest creation was Pinocchio. The night he'd finished carving Pinocchio, he'd wished the puppet were a real boy. Then the blue fairy appeared and brought Pinocchio to life. If the puppet proved himself worthy, someday he'd become a real boy. "Father, I'm home," Pinocchio called. The only answer was the tick-tock of a dozen clocks. "Father?" Pinocchio said. He went into the next room and found Geppetto seated at a workbench. "What are you making?" Pinocchio asked. "A cuckoo clock," Geppetto replied. "I even brought home a live bird for a model. That way I can carve the cuckoo just right." He pointed to a bird cage. "May I take the bird out and play with him?" Pinocchio asked excitedly. "I'm afraid not," said Geppetto. "You aren't the only one who's been watching him." Geppetto nodded toward Figaro the cat, who was following the cuckoo's every move. "Please," begged Pinocchio, "I'll be careful." "I'm sorry, son," Geppetto said gently. "I wouldn't want Figaro to chase him." "Yeah, that's just like cats. They're always chasing mice and birds." Pinocchio spent the afternoon in the workshop. Every few minutes he glanced up at the bird cage and imagined what fun it would be to have the cuckoo perch on his finger. Pinocchio had never held a live bird before, and he was very curious to find out if it would sing to him. Would it sit on his shoulder and go wherever he went, he wondered. At the end of the day, Geppetto went out to the market. As soon as he left, Pinocchio hurried over to the birdcage. "Pinocchio," Jiminy said, "what are you doing?" "Taking the bird out so we can visit," the puppet replied. "Don't worry." As soon as Pinocchio opened the cage door, Figaro jumped onto the table. "Watch out!" Jiminy cried as the cat leaped toward the open bird cage. Figaro was fast, but the cuckoo was faster. The bird zipped out of the cage. Crash! Figaro hit the side of the cage. The cuckoo flew around the room. "See?" Pinocchio told Jiminy. "I told you it would be fine." "I don't know," the cricket murmured. "You shouldn't have disobeyed your father." The cuckoo darted in and out of the rafters, then began to investigate Geppetto's clocks. Wherever the bird went, Figaro followed him. Jiminy climbed onto the windowsill to get a better view. All of a sudden, the cuckoo turned and began flying straight toward him. "Look out!" cried Pinocchio. Jiminy leaped to one side. The cuckoo had just spotted an open window. With a happy cry, "Woo, woo, woo, woo," he flew past Jiminy and out of the shop. Uh-oh, Pinocchio's in big trouble now. In the words of Michelle, "You're in big trouble, mister." Just then, Geppetto walked in. He glanced at the empty birdcage. "Pinocchio!" he yelled. "I told you not to open the cage. Now look what has happened. I am very disappointed." Pinocchio looked around the room and spotted Figaro. "I didn't do it," he lied. it was Figaro. He opened the bird cage and ate the cuckoo. Figaro! Cried Geppetto. He picked up the cat to scold him, which was lucky for Pinocchio because at that moment the puppet's nose began to grow. It inched out farther and farther until it was the length of a crayon. It was growing because Pinocchio had lied. It was growing because he had lied. Pinocchio didn't want his father to realize he had told a lie, so he tried to hide his nose. Yep, that's what happens. Every time Pinocchio lies, his nose grows. Father, Pinocchio said, I think I'll go to bed early tonight. I'm not feeling well. By the time Pinocchio had gotten under the covers, his nose had grown another inch. The next morning, Pinocchio sneaked out of bed early. Then he headed for the door, calling, Goodbye, Father. I'm off to school. Jiminy hurried after him. He knew Pinocchio wasn't going to school because his nose was growing again. Pinocchio, Jiminy said, you must start telling the truth. I can't, cried Pinocchio. I'll get into too much trouble. Pinocchio hurried through the village asking people if they'd seen the cuckoo. Then he climbed the bell tower and looked out across the sky. Next, he bought a birdhouse and some seeds, hoping the cuckoo would stop by for a snack. But he didn't have any luck. Wherever Pinocchio went, Jiminy Cricket followed along, trying to convince him to tell the truth. But Pinocchio wouldn't listen. Pinocchio told lie after lie about why he wasn't at school, where he was going, and what he was doing. Each time, his nose grew a little longer. At the end of the day, Pinocchio's nose was longer than ever, and he still hadn't found the cuckoo. Maybe you're right, Pinocchio said with a sigh. It's time to tell the truth. The puppet began to walk back through the streets of the village. Jiminy had run ahead to clear a path. At last they got home, with Pinocchio arriving several seconds after Jiminy and his nose. Figaro didn't really eat the cuckoo, Pinocchio told his father. I opened the bird cage and the cuckoo flew away. I'm sorry I disobeyed you, but most of all, I'm sorry I lied. As Pinocchio spoke, his nose became shorter and shorter until it was back to its normal size. I'm glad you finally told the truth, said Geppetto. And now I have something to show you. He led Pinocchio inside where an object sat on the table covered with a sheet. Had his father finished carving the clock? Geppetto drew aside the sheet, and under it was a bird cage with the cuckoo inside. Where did you find him? Pinocchio asked. I was working on the clock today, and he flew in through the window. I think he likes it here, Geppetto exclaimed. He would, Pinocchio said. It's the best home anyone could ever want. Before long, night had fallen. Pinocchio yawned. I think it's time for bed. Geppetto said with a smile. Pinocchio gave his father a hug and got into bed. The cuckoo sang sweetly, and everyone drifted off to sleep. The end. Remember, it's not okay to lie. The only way for you to get out of a situation is by telling the truth. I'm not saying you won't get punished for what you did, because you probably will, but facing your parents or guardians can be a lot less painful than getting stuck in a big lie. So remember, always tell the truth. See you later. Bye.